Hi guys, welcome back to Mysteries channel. Thank you so much for clicking on the video, checking out the channel. I really do appreciate it. Today we're going to go over a topic that I love to go over, and that's the fact that the timeline is off, people. So let's go over it. You see, about 100 years ago or so, many scholars believe that Native Americans did not reach this continent until 1 in 5,000 years ago. 50 years later, they're like, maybe it's closer to 10,000 years. But still, it was kind of scoffed at. And then a few decades after that, they're like, maybe it was closer to 20 to 35,000 years, making their way across the ice bridge. As this bridge thaws and disappears, it ends the migration period and erases the memories of the ancient people knowing the vast continent on either side of the water. More recently, scholars started to question that narrative as well, thinking, yes, they probably came down on the ice bridge, but maybe they reached the Americas a couple of different ways. But that 30,000 year mark still is that line in the sand that I just don't know if they'll ever really cross. And it bothers me. Why would the Americas be devoid of people when we know that Australia already had people reaching it? It's now accepted that Aboriginals have been on the island continent for about 50,000 years, and let's be real, there's a ton of evidence that suggests a much, much longer time period. So let's go over some of the evidence and see if it gives us any insight into how ancient we are, why there is so little evidence of our ancient past, and what's up with the Americas? Why was it so supposedly empty? We begin in Australia. The time of arrival for the first people on the Australian continent and nearby islands is a matter of hot debate among researchers. The earliest conclusive human remains found in Australia are those of Mungo Man and Mungo Lady, which have been dated to around 50,000 years BCE. But let's be real here, people. That's found evidence. There's so much that we haven't found yet, right? Genetic research has inferred a date of habitation as early as 80,000 years ago. Other estimates range from 100 to 120,000 years. Evidence of fires in southwest Victoria suggest human presence in Australia 120,000 years ago. Although more research is required, finding ancient humans, it's hard business, and for a long time it was because many believed that there weren't that many people out there back in the day. Back in the day. We were considered sparse tribes of people, typically in conflict, roaming around endlessly. But something just doesn't feel right about it. We now know that to preserve ancient evidence of anything, really, conditions need to be just right, almost perfect. The problem is, in areas where conditions are right now, they weren't in ancient times, and vice versa, right? And not only that, but we forget that culturally, in a lot of societies on all the continents, some of the practices used for the dead kind of destroyed evidence on us. In the long run, I think we are older and we had a much larger population than what is currently taught. Mungo Man and Mungo Lady give us some insight, so here's what we learned from them. But first, let me quote Wikipedia. The Lake Mungo remains are three prominent sets of human remains that are possibly Aboriginal Australians. Lake Mungo 1, also called Mungo Woman, Lake Mungo 3, also called Mungo Man, and Lake Mungo 2, that's just not called anything. The real question here is, people, if they weren't Aboriginal Australians, as questioned by Wikipedia, then who in the hell were they? Are they suggesting that another human species made it to Australia? Are they inferring that stupid caveman Homo erectus made it to Australia? I hope you can feel the sarcasm here, people, because Homo erectus was not stupid by any means, but it does make you question, why did they leave it so ambiguous? Just kidding. I know exactly what they're doing here. But let's continue. Lake Mungo is in New South Wales, Australia, specifically the World Heritage Site listed as Willandra Lakes region. Mungo Woman was discovered in 1969 as one of the world's oldest known cremations. Chime in here one more time. I searched and I searched and I searched and I could find no other cremation older than her. I don't know why they're making it say one of. She is the oldest and the oldest by far. Why can't they just say currently Mungo Lady is the oldest evidence of cremation? Anyway, I digress. Mungo Lady is dated to about 50,000 BCE. The remains designated Mungo Man were discovered in 1974 and are dated to around 42,000 years old. The oldest Homo sapien human remains found on the Australian continent. Well, look at that. They are Homo sapiens. So why the weirdness at the top of the article? Do they know something we don't? Or are these Aboriginal Australians? Let's go over why there is so little evidence. Mungo woman was an early human inhabitant of the continent of Australia. Her remains are one of the oldest sets of anatomically modern humans found in Australia. Her bones show that after she died, the corpse was burned, then smashed, then burned a second time before being liberally covered with ochre, sourced from a location several hundred kilometers from the burial site. But seriously, do you see what I'm saying here? Like, that was their funerary process for her. And in the Americas and in other places too, you have funeral pyres, or you have open air platforms that you set the body on top of, and in the end, nothing is left. And I'm not saying this is the case for all ancient societies. We know it's not. Some use caves, some mummified. We have common knowledge of that. So let's take a deeper look at Mungo Man. Mungo Man had been laid out in a great ceremony on his back with his knees bent and his hands positioned over the groin with his fingers interlocked. Next to the body were the remains of a fire. The body had been sprinkled again with red ochre, and his is the earliest known example of a sophisticated and artistic burial practice. This ritual burial aspect of the discovery has been particularly significant to Indigenous Australians because it indicates that certain cultural traditions have existed for much, much longer than previously thought. At the time of Mungo Man's discovery, it's believed that the Aborigines had arrived in Australia from Asia around 20,000 years ago. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Just like the Americas. The skeleton of Mungo Man had belonged to an individual who, based on evidence of osteoarthritis in the lumbar vertebrae and severe wear on the teeth with pulp exposure, was about 50 years old. The bone structure had a slender character, which contrasts the morphology of modern Indigenous Australians. Subsequent studies using the length of limb bones to estimate Mungo Man's height suggest a height of 6 foot 5 inches. Unusually tall for an Aboriginal male. And there we have it, folks. I'm being serious. I'll be damned if this does not sound just like Kennewick Man. Am I right? It just seems really hard for some paleoanthropologists to come to grips with the fact that ancient us didn't look like less ancient us or like us right now. It blows my mind how many times I come across articles that talk about skeletal remains and suggest that these people must have been from elsewhere. Remember when I talked about Kennewick Man? His skeleton was mistaken for a trapper's skeleton because he didn't look Indian enough. Luckily, he was so well preserved that they were able to do DNA analysis on him, and lo and behold, he was genetically related to the local tribe that was claiming him. That debacle took 20 years to resolve. So what was going on back then? We'll go with the oldest date so far, and we'll just see what was happening in the world to maybe better understand why people are really moving and shaking at this point in time. 150,000 years ago was another chaotic time period on Earth. At this point, the Earth is beginning to switch from glacial to interglacial periods. Ancient climate change there, people. The process hits a full swing at 130,000 years ago, giving Earth a much, much warmer climate. In fact, warmer than today's climate. 130,000 years ago, Earth was on average 5 degrees hotter than it is right now. Why is that? The Earth's climate in a large way is connected to two things: the sun and its cycles and the axis at which the planet sits. So it almost seems like 150 to 130,000 years ago, there's a mass exodus of survivors leaving areas that are maybe now unlivable. Let's just hop on over to the Americas now. If ancient people traveled the oceans to get to Australia, maybe even up to 150,000 years ago, which there's current evidence to back up, what would stop them from coming to the Americas? The weather was warmer. There was a chain of islands that connect Asia and the Americas, much like there's a chain of islands that connect Asia to Australia. See what I'm saying here? Something else to note, in The Nightmare of Manifest Destiny, Native American sites were literally mowed over. I mean, bulldozed, completely flattened. Many times this happened on purpose and people knew what they were doing, but there are also a lot of times where they had no idea what they were looking at. They honestly were just trying to level out hills, demolishing ancient Native American cities. So let's go over a few places in the Americas that may be more ancient than is accepted. Here's an interesting place in North America that no one really talks about. Well, at least not seriously. An ancient place that no one is studying that still exists. or at least parts of it still exist. The East Bay Wall, or the Berkeley Mystery Walls, whatever you want to call it. The oldest published mention of the mystery appears to be March 8th, 1896 in the Sunday San Francisco Chronicle. And I quote, "Half a mile east of Grizzly Peak stand the remnants of stone walls which have long baffled the researchers and curiosity of antiquarians. By whom they were erected and when and why is an unsolved mystery." The same article goes on to drop a theory or two. Like perhaps the walls are the work of a long-forgotten race. Or maybe Aztecs of Mexico who might have used the walls for defense. This vast area holds the remnants of ancient stone walls all over East Bay, and nobody knows how old they are, who built them, or why. And though many people have pondered about it and have written about it even all the way back to the 1890s, no serious scholarly study has ever been undertaken. They stretch for over 50 miles, are found up and down the hills of East Bay from Berkeley to San Jose. The stone walls are up to 5 feet in some places and are constructed from boulders varying in size, some weighing up to a ton. The walls run in broken sections anywhere from a few meters to a half a mile in length and are placed in unlikely and inaccessible places. They seem to serve no purpose. They're not continuous or high enough to act as an enclosure or a measure of defense. The heavy stones are sunken deep into the ground and they are overgrown with lichen. After meandering throughout the Oakland Hills, they head inland towards Mount Diablo, where they lead to a mysterious stone circle up to 30 feet in diameter, and in one place the walls form a spiral 200 feet wide that encircles a large boulder. Now, Spanish settlers in the area reported that the walls were already there when they arrived, and the Spaniards were the first, non-indigenous people in the area. And when they went to go ask the local tribe, they said the same thing. They've been here longer than us. But in all honesty, no one's ever actually taken the time to figure out what the heck is going on over there, and I think it's just bizarre. Some other examples that I'm not going to go into huge detail on because I want to do a separate video are the dolmens of North America. And no, I'm not talking about the East Coast ones. I'm talking about the ones in Montana. I'm going to do a separate video on these because it's super freaking fascinating. But how old are these? Who built them? Why aren't we learning about this in school? It just drives me freaking nuts. It's amazing. Dolmens all over the world. They're in Australia, Europe, Asia, Africa, America. Obviously, there's some connection here. Am I right? Or how about Uxmal in Mexico? Now look at this pyramid. Freaking super cool, super interesting. It doesn't get as much love as some of the other places in Mexico, but guess what? The name Uxmal translates to built 3 times. This has been built and then rebuilt and then rebuilt. We don't know how long we've been here. And then if you go all the way down to the bottom of South America in Chile, the oldest mummies on earth are there. They predate the Egyptian mummies by 3,000 years. Think about it. It does not make sense that the rest of the world was populated 50, 75, 100,000 years ago, except for the Americas. It just makes no damn sense. The reason why it was so easy to dismiss all the evidence of past ancient civilizations in the Americas 100, 200 years ago is because people didn't want to accept it. It's a lot easier to steal land from someone you thought just stole the land themselves. You know what I mean? I'm positive that we're going to find a lot more evidence in the future when we let go of our preconceived notion of what indigenous people look like and behave like, for that matter, so that when we find sites, whatever continent it be on, we don't mess up history with our silly thoughts. You know what I mean? Anyway, I hope you guys have yourselves a very great day, and see you in a bit.